And ICE officers, 2 of them, shot him 10 times. 10 times. That's what happened. And why aren't we all just totally shocked? That's not acceptable. And then, that is all done with the authority of the state, with no restraint. And then, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who's responsible for the training and the discipline and the mission, blows this off and says these 2 people were domestic terrorists. No accountability, no expression of sadness, no expression of remorse. How is this acceptable to any one of us here? How is that acceptable?
This may look like a senator reacting to a single incident, but it's actually a test of how power is exercised when no one is watching. What's really being tested here is whether federal authority still comes with restraint, accountability, and responsibility to the public. This raises broader questions about how institutions respond when force is used, and explanations replace answers. In this video, we'll break down how a Senate floor speech exposes deeper cracks in oversight, leadership, and constitutional trust.
Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from Vermont.
First, I want to acknowledge my colleagues from Minnesota, Senator Smith and Senator Klobuchar. You have conveyed to us the deep pain and anguish that you feel and that every Minnesotan feels about the shocking shootings that occurred in your state. And this follows on tragedies that occurred before this. And the pain of your community is the pain of this United States Senate. And my deep appreciation, and I know I express that on behalf of all of my colleagues, for you putting this in a human, real perspective. Thank you very much. Second, this is shocking. 2 people got shot for no reason. Absolutely no reason. Renee Good, a 37-year-old mom, 3 kids. She was protesting. That officer walked from the back of her car to the side of her car to the front of her car. He shot through the front windshield and then moved to the side and shot 2 shots in the driver's side window. That's what happened. And then Alex Preddy, who was out with his cell phone camera observing what was going on and was shocked, I'm sure, to see that an ICE agent was pushing a woman into the snowbank, and he came over to try to get between them. There was a scuffle. He was in total subjugation by the officers who had him on the ground. He was disarmed, never using, by the way, or even threatening to use the gun that he had legally in his possession. And ICE officers, 2 of them, shot him 10 times. 10 times. That's what happened. And why aren't we all just totally shocked? That's not acceptable. And then, that is all done with the authority of the state, with no restraint. And then, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who's responsible for the training and the discipline and the mission, blows this off and says these 2 people were domestic terrorists. No accountability, no expression of sadness, no expression of remorse. How is this acceptable to any one of us here? How is that acceptable? And yet what we're hearing when we are saying, let's look into this, let's get some reforms in place that allow our citizens to feel safe, for there to be accountability, we're being told it's too complicated because we've already got a bill and we'll have to divide it. And that means procedural hassles. That means, oh, the House will have to come back. Are we serious? That's called doing your job. It's called accountability. It's called taking responsibility. I want to pay tribute to the people of Minnesota. We're actually having a discussion about inconveniencing House members because they've got to get on a plane and come back if we act to do something that every American knows we should do, pass the bipartisan bills where we've got 5 bills done, and take on the burden of responsibility that we have as a United States Senate to put reforms in an agency that needs reform. And folks in Minnesota, it's 20 degrees below zero. They're out in the streets. They're out protesting peacefully. They're out providing coffee and cocoa and some warm soup to each other so they can get through this. Why are they doing it? You know what? They care about the right of assembly. They care about the First Amendment. They care about their constitutional rights, but the reason they're doing it is they care about each other. That's who they care about. In this United States Senate, our job is to care about every single American. And we have an agency that is totally out of control with a leader that is, I would say it's incompetent. But the cruelty of that remark, to dismiss two people, innocent people who died as domestic terrorists, tells me there's not an inkling of acceptance of responsibility that goes with the enormously important job of being Secretary of Homeland Security. So I'm not going to vote and give a blank check where we're not even willing to have a discussion about what the reforms are. And Mr. President, I want to say, I know every one of us here are shocked by what happened. This is not a Republican-Democratic deal. This is about seeing two innocent people shot, and they didn't need to be. And one of the things that's so important for us, if we have a family, we live in a community, is to act in a way where the people around us can be confident that we've got their back, that we won't hurt them or harm them, that we notice what their struggles are, and we'll try to help. And all of us here have such admiration for law enforcement and the work they do, and it's such an incredibly hard job. But more than anyone else, the people contacting me in Vermont to express their shock at what happened in Minnesota are people in law enforcement. They know the job is hard, but they have accepted the responsibility to be a guardian, to be protective. We can accept our responsibility where we are the 100 people in this country, in this Senate, who have the opportunity to provide some reassurance and safety and confidence to the people each and every one of us represents. So yes, let's do our job. Mr. President, I yield back.
The moment that just unfolded on the Senate floor was not a policy disagreement or a partisan skirmish. It was an eruption of moral alarm. Senator Peter Welch stood and described, in stark and unflinching terms, what he says occurred in Minnesota, a sequence of actions carried out under official authority that left the entire chamber momentarily stripped of its usual defenses. When he repeated the words 10 times, he wasn't emphasizing statistics. He was forcing the Senate to sit with the weight of irreversible force used without restraint and then dismissed without reflection. What made this moment so powerful was not only the description itself, but the question that followed it. Why aren't we all shocked? Why does the machinery of government move so quickly past events that should stop it cold? In that question lies the deeper issue this hearing exposed: the growing distance between authority and accountability, between power exercised and power explained. Senator Welch was not speaking abstractly. He referenced specific actions, specific responses, and a specific failure of leadership. He described individuals who, by his account, posed no imminent threat, individuals whose actions did not warrant the outcome that followed. And then he turned his attention upward, not toward the officers on the ground, but toward the leadership responsible for training, discipline, and mission. Toward the Secretary of Homeland Security, whose response, in his telling, offered labels instead of answers, justification instead of examination. That is where this moment transcended any single incident, because this hearing was not only about what happened on a cold day in Minnesota, it was about what happens afterward when the state is asked to look at itself. Does it pause? Does it investigate? Does it accept responsibility? Or does it close ranks, cite complexity, and defer action in the name of procedure? Welch's frustration was not aimed at process itself, but at how process can be used as a shield. When calls for reform are answered with claims that it's too complicated, too inconvenient, too disruptive to existing schedules, the message received by the public is unmistakable: that accountability is optional, that urgency fades inside marble walls, that inconvenience to lawmakers outweighs the need for reassurance to the people they represent. The senator's remarks about Minnesota were deliberate. While officials debate logistics, he reminded the chamber that ordinary citizens were standing outside in extreme conditions, exercising their constitutional rights peacefully, supporting one another simply to be heard, not driven by ideology alone, but by a shared belief that something had gone wrong and that silence was not an option. That contrast between the lived urgency of the public and the procedural hesitation of government is the fault line running through this entire exchange. This was also not an attack on law enforcement as a profession. Welch made that clear. In fact, he underscored that many of the voices expressing concern were from within law enforcement itself. People who understand the difficulty of the job, people who accept the burden that comes with authority, people who know that being a guardian means restraint matters as much as readiness, and that legitimacy depends on trust. And that is the heart of this moment. Trust. Trust that power will be used carefully. Trust that when something goes wrong, the system will respond with honesty instead of defensiveness. Trust that leadership understands the gravity of its role. When that trust is shaken, it cannot be repaired with slogans or silence. It requires transparency. It requires reform. It requires leaders willing to say not just what they are authorized to do, but what they are obligated to examine. Welch's refusal to grant what he called a blank check was not a threat. It was a reminder of the Senate's purpose, that oversight is not obstruction, that debate is not delay, that accountability is not optional. The Senate exists not merely to fund agencies, but to ensure that those agencies operate within the bounds of law, ethics, and public confidence. This moment also cut across party lines. Welch explicitly stated that this was not a Republican or Democratic issue. It was a question of whether the government can look at the consequences of its own actions without flinching, whether it can hear criticism without retreating into institutional reflex, whether it still understands that authority, unchecked, corrodes the very legitimacy it depends on. In a functioning system, moments like this trigger introspection, not dismissal. They lead to hearings that ask hard questions, reforms that acknowledge flaws, and leadership that recognizes responsibility does not end at authorization. When those steps are resisted, the damage extends far beyond one agency or one incident. It reaches into the public's sense of safety, fairness, and belonging. As this hearing concluded, the question left hanging was not about votes or bills. It was about whether those entrusted with power are willing to carry its moral weight, whether they will act not as managers of optics, but as stewards of public trust, whether they understand that legitimacy is earned, not declared. This is why moments like this matter, because they reveal the pressure points of our system. They show us where accountability is demanded and where it is resisted. They remind us that democracy does not fail all at once. It erodes when urgency is met with indifference, when responsibility is deflected, when leadership forgets who it serves. At Liberty Report USA, we believe these moments must be examined, remembered, and challenged. Not for outrage, but for clarity. Not for division, but for accountability. The work of oversight belongs to the people as much as it does to Congress. If you believe transparency matters, if you believe power must answer to the public, and if you believe accountability is not optional in a free society, support our work. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.